Ladies and gentlemen, tonight has multiple aspects of significance to me personally. August 9th in the year of our Lord 2020 is both my 36th birthday and the date which marks having lived 50% of my life here in the United States and 50% in the place of my birth, the United Kingdom. It also marks facing off against the very first atheist who came after me personally since I started engaging in YouTube apologetics when he supposedly debunked one of my videos. Now, in that light, let this day stand as a line of demarcation for me and to all those who meet me in the future, whether it be in person or in the digital ring of debate in which we are currently engaged. From henceforth, there will be no quarter given to the enemies of our Creator, nor those who refuse to look beyond the pathetic talking points spewed by my opponent and those like him. The verbal weapons you wield are broken. Your arguments are juvenile and lacking in substance. The more I engage with atheists, the more I realize you are mental children desperate to avoid the obvious. That the dogma of naturalism and its foundation of Darwinian evolution is nothing but a cloud of smoke which is decimated by the wind of rational thought and logical analysis. We are told that evolution is a settled and proven science, yet its very foundation is based upon the assumption that information can come from nothing. If this is so, why then does all modern science prove beyond doubt that life cannot reproduce without the genetic code housed in our DNA? In any other context, a person would be considered insane to insist that a language of any kind, spoken or written, could form without consciousness and intellect being required. I ask you, would any rational person argue the numerous languages used for the software and design of hardware required for this debate? Could they possibly somehow spring into existence by chance? Without intelligence and logic, can any of these concepts be devised? I would say no, but I shall let the words of my opponent address this question. I leave the determination of his rationality to you, the audience. This brings me to what my next video will explain in much more detail, and that is the genetic code, and more importantly, the information it contains. Atheists desperately attempt to avoid the premise that it actually contains real information and is not just purely deterministic chemical reactions.
I mean, it is just chemical reactions. Like I said at the beginning of this, DNA can be interpreted as a code, but that does not make it inherently a code. We can determine certain sequences, and we can know the effect of those sequences on the rest of the organism or on certain biomechanical operations or chemical interactions within an organism. Like, we can determine those things. Just because we can determine sequences in DNA does not mean that it inherently contains code, though.
DNA it's an identical process to computer codes. And it's very interesting that, you know, ideas about computers developed early in the 20th century, and, you know, Claude Shannon comes along in 1948.
But it is not a code, it's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.
There needs to be no question that communication theory applies to biology. Okay? All of these concepts can be applied to DNA.
Is that debated anywhere?
Only among people who are ignorant, frankly.
Okay.
Okay? People in the know do not debate this fact.
But not in this credible scientific community. This is well understood.
There is no credible scientific argument to try to say that applying communication theory to biology is somehow inappropriate. Yeah. There's hundreds of scientific papers that go very deep into the subject, and so, no, there's...
And again, the only people that have ever mentioned this or ever said this or ever expect this are creationists, just like you.
I'm talking at the moment with Perry Marshall and Kevin Ham. Perry Marshall is from Chicago in the United States, and Kevin Ham is from Vancouver in Canada, and we have just taken part in the United Kingdom launch of a huge prize to be won by anybody who can produce the genetic code or a genetic code via natural process generating it itself. Mm-hmm. Perry, have I got that right, first of all?
That's right. Any code, any encoding, message decoding system that can come out of an emergent property from chemicals to code would qualify.
Yes.
And I think it's one of the most fundamental questions in all of science. And it just hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves.
That's right, it hasn't, and I think that's partly why we've been highlighting it in the meeting that we've just had here at the Royal Society in London. You can't get much more prestigious than that, can you?
No, it's
by the way,
it's
yes.
delightful.
Yes. Now, question perhaps also to Kevin: does it really need to be 10 million? You know, I'm a scientist. To me, that's a huge sum of money.
But it is not a code. It's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.
Damn, dude, there's 10 million on the line for this one. I guess you just need to fly over to Oxford, go meet up with the Royal Society, and tell them how they've been completely duped on this entire premise of the genetic code actually being a real code, and that they don't need to be remotely associated with it because it could completely decimate their credibility as academics. In the information age we currently enjoy, to me it's a completely implausible concept to conclude that HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, WordPress, apps, or any of the other aspects of technology that utilize software, that they could possibly come into existence without programmers and designers being required.
I agree, that would be crazy to assert, but luckily that's not what we're asserting. That's not what anybody's asserting here. It's only you that's claiming that evolution would entail this. So you're basically building a straw man argument against people that already accept evolution and are misrepresenting their arguments for evolution. You see, the biggest difference here is that we have natural explanations for like why DNA looks the way that it does, why it operates the way that it does, and why the diversity of life that we have here on Earth exists. We have natural explanations for why these things happen. We don't have explanation for why like PHP exists, other than somebody designed it. So what you're really doing here is you're comparing bananas to horses here.
Now, while it continues to fascinate me that people such as Godless Engineer continue to make these same assertions, I'm just going to pull up a few papers real quick and scroll through them on how the genetic code, it's a universal enigma from Eugene Koonin. I mean, he's a very high level, actually an atheist, but he admits that there's a code and it's a major conundrum for origin of life. We've got things like dual syntax. I'm pretty sure that syntax is a component of coding and programming. Go figure. Apparently that doesn't exist, but here's evidence that it does. And then here we can really get into some fun stuff where not only is the genetic code have its own programming logic, translational pausing is a subset syntax and code base, which enables a dual control from a timing perspective. We're talking about 3D printing logic rules that are executed through the ribosome through the dual syntax in the genetic code that supposedly isn't a code, even though it houses all sorts of controls, including space and time, which I think is just fascinating. And then you go over into, here's another paper on how computational theory applies to genetics. I mean, you can just go on and on and on with all these different pieces, and you get into information. And here's some interesting stuff about prescriptive information and formal information and how it requires forethought and logic in order for the ciphers and the algorithms to be executed. But according to my opponent, none of this stuff actually exists. There's just no logical, plausible, and probable conclusion you can reach that says binary code will magically transform into syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and all the other if, then, and else logic rules that are required for any type of programming to actually work.
And again, the only people that have ever mentioned this or ever said this or ever expect this are creationists, just like you.
Now, before I go into my formal arguments against neo-Darwinism and modern synthesis, I want you all as the audience to just observe one of the many nanomachine component processes is required for life to exist.
What you are about to see is DNA's most extraordinary secret: how a simple code is turned into flesh and blood. It begins with a bundle of factors assembling at the start of a gene. A gene is simply a length of DNA instructions stretching away to the left. The assembled factors trigger the first phase of the process, reading off the information that will be needed to make the protein. Everything is ready to roll. 3, 2, 1, go. The blue molecule racing along the DNA is reading the gene. It's unzipping the double helix and copying one of the 2 strands. The yellow chain snaking out of the top is a copy of the genetic message, and it's made of a close chemical cousin of DNA called RNA. The building blocks to make the RNA enter through an intake hole. They are matched to the DNA, letter by letter, to copy the A's, C's, T's, and G's of the gene. The only difference is that in the RNA copy, the letter T is replaced with a closely related building block known as U. You are watching this process called transcription in real time. It's happening right now in almost every cell in your body.
Obviously, this debate will go in many directions, but here are 5 positions which challenge the premise of undirected evolution through natural selection being a logical, plausible, or probable reason for our existence. First, adaptation of existing functions to account for environmental condition variance is primarily executed through epigenetic factors which do not result in new core functions. This is a known fact, and the epigenome is a fundamental element which has shaken the entire premise of evolution to its core. Not only are these adaptations the result of variable gene expression caused by epigenetics, they are not the result of mutations. Rather, are controlled modifications executed through read, write, and erase nanomachines. Second, it is my position that macroevolution is not proven by speciation, nor by variance within species. While Darwinists attempt to explain this with very slow changes over time, it is now known that literally thousands of genes and gene regulatory networks working in synchronicity are required for new body plans to exist. Not only must they work in unison, it has been shown extremely minor modifications are fatal in embryo development. While I do not discount that variance can occur on a contained level, it is my strong contingency that these are the result of reorganization and adaptation of existing data and functional capacity, not the creation of new information or function solely through random mutation and natural selection. Third, the variation of transcription factors in gene regulatory networks results in a significant difference in gene expression. To date, the most studied of these are in relation to cognitive function, and show a 9 to 23% of variation between chimps and humans. It has also been shown these differences must work in unison, and any degradation of this, even to the level of point mutation, results in dynamic impairment or death. Not only does this showcase the extreme importance of gene regulation, it also decimates the relevance of similar coding genes in relation to final outcome. Moreover, the significant differences in non-coding regions of the genome become apparent for things ranging from introns, retrotransposons, enhancers, and promoters, to name a few, all of which have been dismissed by those against intelligent design. However, the discoveries made in the past decade have made their relevance unavoidable. Fourth, it has now become apparent through structural biology that not only is the prescriptive information housed in the genetic code required, it must also be geographically coordinated through dynamic real-time folding to enable full gene expression. This applies to interchromosomal data transfer, which not only forces acceptance of physical gene locations being vital, it also decimates the relevance of similar sequences existing in another organism, but being housed in a completely different physical location. Not only does this make sequence similarities irrelevant in relation to undirected natural selection, it actually lends credence to intelligent design. Fifth, the prescriptive information in our genetic code uses arbitrary values, the meaning of which is unknown without a translation mechanism. This semantic meaning is immaterial, and in no other context could it be interpreted without the prior actions of an intelligent agent. It is an unavoidable reality that our genetic code is a 4-dimensional programming codebase unlike anything humans have ever conceived. When all of this is viewed through the now known reality that not only must the information exist, it must also be in a specific physical location in the genome. To conclude that foreknowledge of the desired outcome is not required for life to exist, requires those who dismiss intelligent design to suspend all rational thought. Therefore, its initial creation by undirected physical process, without the action of an intelligent agent, is not only neither logical, plausible, or probable, but impossible. In closing, as you consider these arguments and expansion of them throughout the debate, ask yourself this question: whose position is more rational? Is it those who conclude it is more logical, plausible, and probable that these things could not occur by chance? Or those who argue, no matter how counterintuitive it is, you must believe this could all happen without a designer being required?
But it is not a code, it's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid.